I'm Scott Cornell, and I'm your host.
I'm Dan Lawson, and I'm your host. This is a scary movie review.
Well, welcome to the first episode. We're here to educate you on scary movies, entertain you.
Independence and indie
films.
Indie horror, yeah.
Yeah. So the first one we started with was...
Benny Loves You.
Benny Loves You. So there's a lot of one-liners that Benny says that I fell in love with. But this movie, basically in a nutshell, is about a man that is trying to escape his past almost, and he's throwing away everything attached to it. And this one doll named Benny is kind of the last, one of the last things he's trying to dump away from his childhood.
Right.
Dan, how did we come up with this movie? What was our strategy on this one?
So I am a big fan of most long-running television shows. Buffy the Vampire Slayer, all those have an episode where everyone is a Muppet. And I don't know why this is a trope that long-running shows go through, but there's a lot. And I don't know why, but I'm a huge fan of Muppets, other than Jim Henson Muppets, which I'm also a big fan of. But I've always been a fan of the Muppet episodes of television shows. And so I kind of did a deep dive on Muppet movies, and Benny Loves You was on the list. And as I was running down the list, I hit that movie, and I've now watched it 4 times.
It's a great movie.
It is a great movie.
Yeah, I remember the first time you recommended this movie to me. We were eating lunch, and this was when I really found out you were a big horror film fan, because you had a list of movies that you were planning on watching or that you'd already watched. And I kind of looked at the list, and I think Benny Loves You was the only one I would have watched. In the beginning, I'd watched them all today, but...
Have you watched all those movies?
I haven't.
Okay, so there were some terrible movies on that list.
Yeah, and one of those movies was, what was it, Toilet?
Toilet.
Death
It was Death
Toilet.
And there was 5 of them. I think there's actually 6 movies. I've only seen 5 of them.
So I think by default, I chose Benny Loves You. And I was really glad I chose that, because I went home, I invited some friends over on a Friday night, and we sat down. Actually, before I invited them over, I started it. And within the first 2 or 3 minutes of the movie, I was like, I need to watch this with a group of people. Like, I cannot watch this movie alone.
Oh, the little girl in the beginning is just
screaming.
Terrifying child.
Yes. And Todd was her doll's name, the little teddy bear Todd. And so I start watching that, and I'm like, I need to get people to enjoy this with me.
Right.
Because it's going to be one of those kind of movies. And even in the first 5 minutes, the little girl screaming and then the murder scene of her dying, I was just like, man, this is going to be a great film. And it reminded me kind of like a Shaun of the Dead, like the goofiness.
Yeah.
Or just, it had some kind of cheekiness to it that I was like, man, I'm going to really enjoy this film. And I did. And I was thankful I picked that movie out, because that kind of sparked a conversation between us to actually start this podcast, because we were like, man, it's fun to talk about these horrible movies. Even though Benny was a really good movie and had a really interesting plot, I think it was just kind of, to me, that sparked the interest in talking about these kind of independent films with you.
There are movies on the list that you may have picked first and just decided to never talk to me again.
The death toilet. The death toilet could have ended our friendship, man.
Right.
Oh. So yeah, I think the Benny Loves You, I really enjoyed. It's just an interesting film. The concept, like you were saying, the Muppet concept, it reminds me when I was a kid watching like the Puppet Master or any of those type of like animation or even claymation, stop motion animation type movies where it was done very poorly. But after the first 10, 15 minutes of watching it, you totally forget how bad it is. And even with Benny, like you had mentioned kind of his motions.
Doing more of a deep dive on that, some of that with him running is actually CG, but he still made it where it was kind of like legs flopping around like a little kid would make a doll run, but by flopping it back and forth from leg to leg. So even though there are small pieces that is CG, he still did it in that manner to look ridiculous.
To look like a little kid's kind of controlling him the whole
To
time.
look like a toy. Because at any point in the movie, if he was like running like Marathon Man style across, it would have ruined the movie.
Yeah. Because obviously
Yeah.
he's a doll killing people.
Yeah.
If he could run at full speed, that would have just totally taken you out of the moment.
Right.
So this movie was done by a director whose name is
Karl Holt.
So Karl Holt, there's not that much information on this guy out there.
He's not done it. So the first thing he did was Eddie Loves You, which was a short. And when kind of Eddie Loves You was actually the exact opposite of Benny Loves You. Eddie Loves You was about this doll kind of taking revenge on its owner. And then when he went to make it into a full length movie, it's about a doll who wants to protect his owner.
Mm-hmm.
But it was filmed in 2014 and it wasn't released until 2019 because Holt did everything. He did all the sound, he did all the editing, he did all the effects. So it took 5 years because he was doing everything by himself.
And he was also Jack, the main character.
And he's also Jack, the main character. And he directed, he did like literally everything. The entire crew was 3 people. It was him, his best friend, and his mom was the entire crew.
Wow.
In this movie. So this movie is the epitome of being just an indie film.
Yeah, and it turned out great for the amount of time and effort they probably put into this. I mean, it was probably a huge amount of time and effort, but for 3 people, it turned out to be an almost full production. It had some indie flavor to it, indie feel to it, but it had a lot of high production value. The effects were cheesy, but well done. And it kind of had, the grotesque amount of blood scenes.
Right.
It probably spent more on fake blood than anything in that movie.
Probably.
But it really, they did a really good job on it. So you mentioned the Eddie Loves You. He was trying to, the character was bad and trying to kill him.
Mm-hmm.
And then in Benny Loves You, like you said, he's trying to protect him.
Right.
And it was also interesting that he was trying to kill anybody that loved Jack and kind of took that love away from Jack, the main character.
Right.
Benny would get almost jealous and trying to protect that relationship he had with Jack, from childhood up to adulthood. But I think that, I don't know what what Holt, the director, was trying to say with this story, but I feel like the whole underlying theme is disconnecting from those things that hold you back in your childhood and kind of define who you are today. And one of the funny things in the movie is he's listening to that self-help tape, which is kind of like an undertone again of the relationship he has with that doll and with himself. And he's trying to grow out of that and kind of move on and grow up. His parents die really early in the film, which is a horrible situation, but kind of funny at the same time. The way they die,
the way they go, it's a little bit.
Yeah, it's a little dark. But what I found interesting too, and I don't know if this might be just kind of an Easter egg, the fact that his dad slips on a little car, like a toy car,
right?
Which, who the hell was playing with toy cars at the age of? He's like 35. It's his 35th birthday. His dad slips on this toy car, which kind of alludes to him leaving his toys laying around the house. Like he's an adult man still living at home with his parents and kind of like still living that lifestyle as a child. And the fact that he, leaves this toy car out, or this toy car that he probably owned as a child is sitting out, and that's what his dad ends up dying from, is kind of humorous a little bit. And then his mom trips over his dad's dead body and then also passes away at that moment. It's kind of humorous that they integrate that into the story, almost like him being the cause of his family's demise.
His childhood being,
just kind of ruined and taken away from him at that moment, because the film also alludes, the fact that Benny exists. His mom gives Benny to him as a gift to fight away the demons in the closet. So he's afraid of the demons in the closet, and the gift is given to him. Mm-hmm. Kind of Benny is there to protect him. And there's some flashbacks in the film of like him remembering his mother in those moments. And I think that's his tie, is the doll Benny is his connection to his childhood. I also found it interesting as I'm watching this. I'm thinking, I'm always looking for a twist. When I'm watching scary movies, I'm like, what's the twist going to be? You know, is his mom still alive? Is his mom possessing the doll? I thought Benny was going to be a made up character in his mind, like an imaginary friend. And he was doing all the murdering. He was doing all this crazy stuff.
Yeah, you want that big, like, Hollywood Sixth Sense kind of twist where it's just like, I didn't realize.
Benny's him the whole time. They were the same person.
Fight Club.
But it doesn't happen, which I was kind of happy about, I think. I think it was just kind of, suspend your disbelief throughout this whole film and just enjoy it for what it is, which is a reflection upon this guy's growing out of a childhood that he obviously, he didn't grow out of it by the age of 35. He was almost forced to transition into an adult.
Mm-hmm.
And it was neat to see that transition, I think, which, it's a scary movie. Obviously it's not like a life learning movie, but there was some of that kind of like hidden in there, the growing from having all these troubles. And then in the end, he's leaving with his new girlfriend or the girl he meets along the way, and they're kind of abandoning the house. They're leaving all this brokenness to start fresh.
But maybe staying in the house was still hanging on to a piece of his childhood. And it kind of showed leaving his house for them to finally be happy. He had to completely cut the ties and completely leave behind all of his past to be able to move forward
and restart everything kind
of.
Right. What was your favorite part of the film?
I don't know that I have a favorite part. Probably the dog scene.
Oh yeah.
I mean, like as a whole, I mean, that's not just a scene. I guess it's a whole piece, but the laughter is ridiculous.
Yeah.
It was hilarious. The whole dog scene. It was probably my favorite part of the movie.
So the boss, so the boss has Jack babysit the dog,
right?
And then chaos ensues. I remember watching that scene and just almost crying, laughing. I think I was crying, laughing. And my friends are looking at me like, well, dude, what is wrong with you? And I just felt that whole scene was drug out so long and almost too long, but it was so funny because
it really was great.
And they keep cutting to the boss, like having such a great night out with his buddies, driving back to pick the dog up. And that whole scene ends with that dog being thrown out the window, landing on the guy's car, and then the guy just freaking out, and Jack just being like so calm about it, like, oh right. yeah. I think Jack says something like the dog had a peaceful death, or it died peacefully in its sleep, or something, and this dog is like wrecked. Oh man, it's just so funny. It reminds me of Dead Alive. I don't know if you ever saw the movie Dead Alive. It's where the guy's mom gets like possessed. She gets bitten by this monkey from some ship. Anyway, it gets chaotic, like over the top chaotic, and just blood everywhere, just obscene amounts of blood. I think it's known as the bloodiest movie ever, and they renamed it. It's either called Brain Dead or Dead Alive, depending on what part of the world you're in.
Mm-hmm.
But it reminded me of that movie a little bit too, just like the next level of chaos. Like there wasn't enough chaos. So this is happening where the dogs get drug around by Benny. And then next thing he's like basically trying to super glue this dog back into a shape to put in its bed to go to sleep.
Yeah.
And then he ends up murdering the dog again because he says the dog's attacking the girl, Dawn.
Right.
So he's just like stabbing this dog, yelling, it was trying to attack you. And then throwing it out the window. Like it just... It gets worse, and worse, and you're just crying, laughing the whole time because it can't get any worse, and it does.
But it keeps getting worse.
Somehow, it just keeps escalating. And that scene for me was also one of my favorites. It's just nonstop because it starts serious where Dawn is trying to explain her situation as a child about the doll she had and like how her parents died, which again is all tied back into this like possessed stuffed animal world. Like as a
Right.
child, I had this thing called a teddy tone, which had like numbers on its belly.
Oh, I don't remember that.
Oh yeah, it was cool. But like it didn't try to murder my family.
I mean,
So that's probably why I don't remember it. Like these people remember their stories. But like all these people had these crazy situations, you know, like that doll killed her family, or she kind of alludes to that because her dad threw it away.
Mhm.
Like
Right.
it was her favorite doll and her dad got rid of it and then her family gets killed. So there's a lot of this like weird possessed stuffed animal stuff going on, I guess, to try to scare people away from throwing away things that they value.
Yeah, they're past.
Yep, you can't get rid of your past that easily. Maybe that's the underlying thing. You
There you
can't
go.
throw away your past.
Yeah, see, Holt's favorite kill was the scene with the tea. When he kills the realtor, this chaos is going on, the girl's screaming, runs up into the attic, trying to get away from him. The realtor's stabbed to death, he's laying there bleeding out, and Benny goes in and he's calmly like boiling some water and he's making tea. And so that was Holt's favorite
That
part.
Yeah.
And which really was great that he was so calm about it, and then he like throws it on him.
Because that's like a crazy scene where it's kind of like spliced up. Like
Right.
it's not shot sequentially. It kind of shows them coming into the house and then it shows like chaos and like the quick
Right.
cuts
Yeah.
between the kills. And actually that I thought that was funny too, the fact that they introduced that ex-girlfriend
Mhm.
in the beginning in kind of the getting to know Jack. And then she comes back to look at the house because the realtor, they're trying to sell the house from under
Right.
him basically because he owes so much money. And then that realtor dies and that ex-girlfriend ends up getting kind of hunted down by Benny, but she escapes up into the attic.
Right.
And that's about 45 minutes, 50 minutes, and like halfway through the movie, maybe.
Yeah.
And then you forget she's up there. Or they almost try to make you forget she's up there because all kinds of
Right.
other stuff happen. Like, Saturday night comes along and Dawn, which is the new love interest that Jack meets at work, she comes over and they're having this date. And the whole time, this girl's still stuck in the attic.
See, I had completely forgot about the girl.
Yeah.
And I'd seen the movie. At this point, I'd seen the movie 2 times, and you had mentioned the
Yeah.
girl in the attic, and I'm just like, what are you talking about? So then I went back and watched it a 3rd time and forgot about it again.
That's awesome.
And then I had to go back a 4th time just to see the attic scene.
And it's in the end. It's after credits.
Yeah, after the credits roll. And the first 2 times I had no idea it was there. The second 2 times I was just like, I completely forgot.
Yeah.
And I had to go back.
It's just such a tiny little part of it. And I was thinking, if they don't wrap this up, this like that's the only thing they didn't explain in the whole movie. I'm
Right.
like, oh man, I'm gonna feel like I missed something. And they did. At the end, she's dead. She's up in the attic, a skeleton, dead.
That was fantastic.
Years later.
Another comment that Holt made in an interview was he didn't know if the movie was going to go over because English humor, and not just English humor is different than American humor, but the references are different. Tea is a really big thing in England, so that whole casualness of boiling water and making tea has a whole different feel to people in England because it's so important to them versus us. We drink tea just because we drink things. And so he was just like, I don't know if this movie is going to be any good because I don't know if any of the jokes are going to go over. So in watching stuff like that, as great as the tea scene was, like how much better would different parts of the movie be if you got those references?
The built-in culture reference.
Yeah, right.
Like the biscuits, like the policeman asking for the biscuits.
Yeah.
And they were special, I don't remember the name, vanilla something cream. Like probably in their country, those are well known, like Oreo
Right.
cookies here.
Right.
But we kind of observe it differently.
And just kind of glaze over it and you move on to the next joke.
Yeah. Speaking of those policemen, I really enjoyed those two. And the one part where after the first murder occurs, the whole house is just wrecked with blood and blood
All
everywhere.
those
Like,
splattered blood on the painting.
Splattered everywhere. And the police guys show back up because they're investigating. They're looking for that, the debt collector, we'll call him.
Yeah.
The guy that kind of gave him a consolidated loan and he was collecting his money. And that's why Benny kills the guy, is because the guy's threatening, Jack's life and trying to hurt Jack. So Benny had to protect him. So he kills the guy, the blood everywhere, policeman knocking on the door. Jack's going down to the front door for the first time, seeing blood everywhere, like the house is wrecked. And then he peeks through the window and the cops kind of peek back through and see him. And then he goes to clean the whole house in this like montage segment. Impossible to complete in 5 minutes. But then he hides the body in that little cupboard and the blood's dripping down. And I really enjoyed that part where like the anxiety and the stress of the cops sitting in that room and the blood dripping, right behind them on the floor. And Jack's freaking out and trying to describe the scene, of what happened. Jack's freaking out, like, just because all the stuff that occurred, the murder, and he's just trying to stay calm. And the head is in the cabinet of the biscuits. So the guy wants the biscuits on a second visit, and he's like, no, we're out of biscuits. So I like the foreshadowing of kind of relationship that he builds with those policemen, because they come over in the first place to investigate all his stuffed animals having their heads ripped off. So they already think he's nuts.
Yeah.
And then they come back again and he's acting just totally crazy. And I just really enjoyed the banter between him and those police officers, which in the end, those police officers let him go.
Because they saw he wasn't crazy.
Yeah. They saw the stuffed animal was the one doing these murders. And they're like, how are we going to explain this without sounding crazy? There's only one explanation. We let him go.
Right.
So the other interesting thing, too, I found was how Jack was treated at work and kind of like beat up by his coworkers, beat up by his boss. He gets like a demotion. And then he kind of carries that weight with him. And he comes home and Benny sees that, that sadness, basically. And he ends up kidnapping his boss and killing his boss. But, I mean, in a way, Benny is this character that just would do anything for Jack.
Right.
Regardless of how crazy it is. And it's like we all have people like that in our lives. Maybe not to that extent of chaotic.
Right.
But it's cool to see like and think about how we have people in our lives that would sacrifice and do things without us even asking them to do them. And I reflected on that too, watching this film. It's like, man, that's dedication and devotion, like that almost only a parent would have for their child,
Right.
It doesn't matter how much you mess up. This guy or this person's always there to support you. And I kind of enjoyed that aspect of it. And again, I'm going kind of deep dive into the emotional side of the movie, but I think it's there.
I think it's always there. No matter what somebody's writing, I feel like you can't help but tap into your life experiences and people you've met or run into or whatever it is in your past. So I don't think anybody can help but to write from that. So I think the underlying story is always there. The underlying emotional pull is always going to be there.
Yeah.
No matter what genre of movie you're watching.
Yeah, because we hope there's not some guy in England or the UK
right.
that had a stuffed animal and this is based on a true story.
You never know. You never.
I mean,
you never know.
I didn't see that one on the news.
Yeah. Man, the thing I like, because, just talk about just kind of anticipating in the movie where, like you said, maybe like Benny's imaginary and he's actually doing all these. And that's, again, pulling from the past, movies you've seen. And it's kind of like a trope where they want to put this clever twist. And it's like, not really a clever twist. We've kind of seen this in a dozen movies. But I think it was the same thing with Benny kidnapping the boss, because we've all seen Christmas Vacation 1,000 times. And he kidnaps the boss because, he didn't get his bonus
yeah.
to put in the pool. So yeah, he kidnaps his boss, and then his boss has a big heart and he's like, oh, I want to write you this check. And it's the whole, the whole Christmas Carol sort of thing where they like see the light of like the wrongs they've did, and then Benny just kills him.
Yeah.
just straight up just murders him after he goes through this whole enlightened thing and comes to his senses, and Benny just murdered.
Yeah.
So it was all for nothing.
Yeah. And Jack's intentions were to let the guy go, I think.
Right.
Like,
yeah,
but
absolutely.
Benny was just like, yeah, unexpected too. I mean, I didn't expect that to happen. I mean, maybe by that point in the film, I was expecting the unexpected, but that kind of shocked me a little bit. Like, what the heck? Yeah, that was a good, interesting sequence.
Yeah.
So they also kind of at his workplace go into his coworkers. So like his love interests that he finds there. Dawn was her name, and then they go on the date. That's where the crazy dog situation happens. But also Richard. Richard was the guy's name. His coworker.
Yeah, what they called it? What they call him? Like
Richard
or
something.
Yeah.
Or he was French. He would call himself that.
Yeah.
When people pronounce it Richard, be like, "You're saying it wrong." So he was kind of a prick, and again, it was one of those stories of the battle at work. Like you always have that guy you're battling against at work for either the position or for attention from your boss. There's always that imbalance at your workplace, and this guy ends up dying later by his own robot that kills him.
Right.
Because he threw away that robot. There's a lot of those kind of stories in here of people throwing away the past or throwing away things that are no longer helpful to them. And then those things coming back. And biting them in the
Right.
butt. So
yeah, it's kind of reoccurring.
Yeah, it is. So that the same thing with his coworker. His coworker threw away his robot project to work on a new robot project. And then his old robot project came and ended up killing him. But not before there was a cool fight scene between some robots. Benny.
That really was a pretty cool.
Yeah.
That was pretty cool.
There's a good sequence of robot fighting and some good action. So in the end, this is a happy story, I would say.
Absolutely.
You know, a few people die along the way, but
yeah,
there's
there's a bit.
There's a bit of killing, a bit of murdering, but I think in the end, it's a happy story. It's almost a love story, and in the end, he gives up Benny. Like he grows out of Benny, and he doesn't need to replace him. I think he's at a point in his life where he doesn't need him anymore, and at the end of the film, there's kind of the sequence of this trash can with smoke coming out of it, and the robot, Richard's robot,
right,
and Todd, the original girl, the screaming girl, her stuffed animal, are standing there, and it might allude to potentially, Benny Loves You Part 2.
I don't know. Yeah, you always have that in the end of movies where you're just like, kind of like the whole like sharktopus thing, and there's the battle, and then they kill the sharktopus, and then right at the end there's the eggs. So there's always that thing that alludes to something more.
Yeah.
But so many things in Benny feels like it's alluding to something that then just gets murdered.
Yep.
So
yeah, they didn't wrap up. I guess there's not that many loose ends, but they kind of
the one loose end was the girl in the attic, and then post credits it wraps it up.
They knew you would be upset if they didn't tell you.
Yeah,
and you didn't even know you were upset.
I didn't even know I was upset.
You kept living your life after watching the movie.
Right.
You were missing out, man. So he moves on. He leaves his stuffed animal. He grows out of it. And I think that's kind of the theme of the whole movie. And the conclusion to me is kind of Jack grows up. He's 35 years old. Some people grow up later than others. There's no right or wrong way to do it. And I think he finally grew out of it, which was a happy ending to me.
Yeah. Yeah. Even though the circumstances.
Yeah.
Questionable. But yeah, it was definitely a happy ending sort of story. Which maybe goes to allude to the whole, happy stories is just a matter of perspective.
Yeah.
Now we're going to get into the rating aspect of the show where we talk about different aspects of the movie and how we would rate them.
Like Dan, so in this movie, what did you think about the acting or the characters? Were you connected to them? I guess, what was your experience watching this?
Man, I really did have a connection with the characters. I thought the acting was great. Again, I'm sure there's a lot I missed, truly, just because I'm an American and there's a lot of English references. So I'm sure I would I would imagine I would like it more if I was English, but just me being an outsider American watching this, I thought the character development was great. The relationships between the character were was was really well done. Um, I don't know. I'd probably score it an 8 as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the originality of the plot.
Oh man.
What do you think? Keep in mind also with movies that are out now, when it was made. It was made in 2014. When you're
True.
thinking about originality, you can't compare it to anything
That I seen after.
post 2014.
So I got to go back in my Wayback Time machine,
Right.
and can't think of
Yeah.
anything that's happened in the last 10 years.
Exactly.
Ah, man, I think I like the originality. Obviously, there's been movies that have done this before with possessed stuffed animals or possessed dolls, possessed Muppets, as you call them.
Right. Well, he actually said in an interview that Child's Play was an inspiration.
Yeah. And
so Holt actually did make that comment.
And that to me is probably the most iconic. So
Yeah.
I would say originality wise, for me, it was there. Like it had value. I didn't feel like I was watching it and saying, oh, I've seen this movie before. I know what's going to happen.
Right.
So I think the originality of the plot for me, I would score it pretty high. I'd say like an 8 out of 10.
Yeah.
Like I would say it definitely had enough to keep me engaged throughout the whole movie, and it continuously surprised me. So
Yeah.
I'd say it was pretty good.
Even though it was a toy, I never compared it watching it. I never compared it to Child's Play until I actually read in an interview where Holt had made that. Because even though they are both toys, the backstory between why the toy is the way the toy is, completely different stories.
Yeah, there's a lot more emotional connection to Benny,
right,
than Chucky. I need to rewatch Chucky, but
Chucky was voodoo,
like factory, right? Wasn't he in the factory? Lightning strikes.
Yeah, and there was this whole voodoo thing. He was a serial killer, and he was trying to escape.
Yes,
so he was actually a human serial killer. He was trying to, and there was this whole like voodoo thing in the toy factory and the lightning, and somehow his soul gets bonded to this.
Yeah,
good boy. The Good Boys?
Good, I think that was it. The Good Boy. Good doll. Good guy.
Good guy.
Good guy.
Yeah. There you go.
We got it.
Yeah.
No, so I would say that's I could see that as being a inspiration and kind of helping Holt write this story, but definitely he took it a totally different way. And
absolutely.
I liked it a lot more. I definitely felt more connected to the plot. Impactfulness and memorable. I think for me, this was an impactful film. Like it's memorable, and I would highly recommend it to friends of mine.
Absolutely.
I mean, what would you say? Like memorable? Like, did you think about it a week later?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've watched it 4 times.
Yeah.
So I mean, and I've recommended it to, and it has to be somebody that is okay with gore.
Yeah.
But as long as somebody's okay with gore, you can recommend it to people who are just run-of-the-mill horror fans, as well as you can recommend the comedy, because the laugh is top shelf.
Yeah.
So yeah, it is definitely a memorable movie.
Yeah, and I wouldn't consider it a scary movie. Like you just said, the gore is scary, but it's almost
there's a lot of gore, but
comedy,
and it is. It's comedy gold.
Yeah,
but it's definitely not like scary.
So like for me, acting and the characters, so the character development, I'd probably say it was an 8 on the Benny Loves You. I'd say it was there. It was solid. Like this being this guy's only film, after finding that out later, I'd probably give it a 10 because he did excellent. But not knowing that, I would say it was an 8 out of 10, definitely.
Yeah. Because I'm going from just doing a little 10-minute short to something like this. Yeah, he did a phenomenal job.
It's crazy.
The production value, again, watching it, it looked great. There's a lot of practical effects. I thought the entire movie was practical effects until digging into it and finding out that some of Benny's shenanigans actually was CG. Scores it even higher for me because watching it, I had no idea anything was CG. I just thought it was all just really great practical effects, the way him like running and flipping around and doing all these murders. So production wise, and the fact that this guy did this whole thing by himself, which I have to be biased after reading all this stuff and seeing that this guy edited and scored all of these things all by himself over 5 years. That's super impactful for me. So yeah, I'm probably gonna rate it 8.
8, nice. Yeah. So as you said before, Dan, like you definitely recommend this to friends.
Absolutely, anybody that'll listen to me, I'm asking them to watch this movie.
I see the "Watch Benny Loves You" sticker on your chest right now.
Absolutely.
Ask me about Benny.
Yeah, like a political,
Ask me about Benny
button.
Just marching around.
Yeah.
So I would say 10 out of 10 on this.
Definitely 10 out of 10 because I can't recommend the movie enough.
It was amazing
to everyone.
Well, that's our show for this week. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for joining us for our first episode. Next week, we'll be talking about Black Sheep, written and directed by Jonathan King.
I look forward to it. I'm Scott Cornell.
And I'm Dan Lawson. This has been a Scary Movie Review. Until next time, stay horrible.